Episode 39, Side Quests 2. Side Quests 2. Sidon swam through the river west of Zora's domain, the light-scale trident held tightly in his hand. His scouts informed him that the Lizalfos had definitely swam this way following the most recent clash between them, continuing west instead of south into the Hylia River, as they usually did. Another tribe of Lizalfos, then? Or had they relocated their primary base of operations?
Sidon, how much further are you wanting to go?
Baz asked, swimming up beside him. Sidon paused in the water, looking around. It was beginning to grow fouler here, tainted by the bad air and ground around Hyrule Castle. Though the water was safe enough to swim through, it tasted wrong, and remaining too long near the castle would result in illness.
I want to find out where they are attacking us from,
Sidon said. He kicked his feet and rose to the surface, looking at the position of the sun. It was getting late, but there were still another few hours of daylight.
Another hour, and we'll head back.
Gaddison's head emerged from the depths, her lavender skin distinct as always. She looked between Sidon and Baz and made a face.
The water tastes like the Lizalfos all decided to take a pie.
Riven burst out of the water, sending a spray of water into Gaddison's face, who spluttered and glared at him.
We're getting kind of far from the others, aren't we? We'll be all right,
Sidon said, grinning.
It's just a few Lizalfos. Come on.
He dove back under the water, and the rest of his guard followed, swimming in a diamond formation with their prince at its head. As they approached the castle moat, the water grew murkier and fouler. When they passed the dark shape of a long-submerged guardian, covered in algae, Sidon swam up to the surface again. His head broke the surface, and he looked around for any signs of the Lizalfos on the nearby bank. The other Zora in his company emerged as well, spreading out and looking for any indication of their quarry.
I don't know, Sid,
Gaddison said, swimming up to him.
I think we lost them today. Maybe the scouts were wrong. We haven't even seen as much as a scale since the river split.
Sidon sighed and nodded.
I think you might be right. If they did come this way, then they're further up the river than I want to go today. Hey, is that normal?
Riven asked, pointing. Sidon turned around, looking up at the tall Hyrule Castle. Guardians swarmed over the castle like a knot of freshly hatched tadpoles, angrily firing their strange energy blasts off into the air or at structures around the castle grounds. As Sidon watched, several of the Guardians destroyed a section of wall, sending ancient bricks down into the moat not that far from where Sidon and his 3 guards swam. One of the flying Guardians came around castle, flying over the moat in their direction. Sidon motioned, and all 4 of the Zora sank beneath the surface as the Guardian passed overhead, shining a red light on the surface of the water. It paused overhead for a few seconds and then continued on.
Maybe we should get back,
Baz suggested, but Sidon shook his head.
In a few minutes. Come on, I want to observe some more.
Sidon ignored the exasperated looks his friends exchanged, swimming closer to the castle. The Guardians were acting strange. True, Sidon didn't often swim this close to the castle, but when he had been here before, they always seemed more passive than this. He had certainly never seen them attacking the remaining structures before. Sidon swam closer, carefully emerging from the water again when he thought that none of the Guardians would see him. They were agitated, for sure. And they weren't confined to just the castle, either. Some of the flying Guardians were on the other side of the river, flying over the steep inclines and groves of trees.
They're looking for something,
he said, after a few more minutes of observation.
I wonder what.
Riven emerged from the water next to him.
Sidon, look at this.
Sidon glanced over, and his eyes widened. He reached out and snatched the object from Riven's hands, turning the small rectangular device over in his hands. The Sheikah slate. Just like the one that Link had. Worry burrowed its way into Sidon's thoughts. Why would Link's Sheikah slate be here, in the moat surrounding the castle? And why were the Guardians so agitated? What were they searching for?
Underwater, now. Look for anything else out of the ordinary.
They searched for another hour, scouring the bottom of the river and circling most of the castle, trying to find any other clues for what happened here. Ultimately, they came up with nothing.
What should we do now?
Baz asked, swimming up to Sidon. Sidon gazed down at the Sheikah slate. Could there be another Sheikah slate just like Link's? It was certainly possible, but he worried for his friend. Finally, he looked up at Baz.
Come on. Let's get back. I think something terrible has happened.
Two. Death Mountain rumbled dangerously, causing a number of boulders to break free of the volcano and sending them rolling down its slope. Yunabo watched as the boulders fell out of sight into one of the many streams of magma around the mountain's base. Daruk said, looking up at the peak.
Reminds me of just before Ganon appeared the first time.
Yunabo looked at his grandfather, who stood on Rudania's back, shining with ghostly green light.
What do you think it means? Might be nothing.
Daruk looked down at Yunabo.
Sometimes the mountain just makes some noise. But after erupting for so long because of Rudania, you would think that he'd be ready to sleep for a while. Yeah, it's kind of weird,
Yunabo said thoughtfully.
Death Mountain has been quiet since Link left.
Daruk nodded slowly and then looked back towards Rudania's head. The damage caused by Link's attack had been mostly fixed. At least the fin had been moved back into place, though the stone and metal there still bore the cracks from their battle. It worked, however, and that was the most important thing.
I get the feeling that the end is coming up pretty quick, Yunabo.
Daruk looked back at him.
You got to make sure you're ready. Me and Rudania, we're going to do what we can to take on Ganon, but you've got to protect everyone else that you can.
Hearing that sent a thrill of fear through Yunabo's heart, but he stood tall. He had been getting better at facing his fears lately. He even beat up a moblin that wandered too close to him the other day. Granted, he did so by throwing stones at it until it ran away, but it was a start, at least.
So, what brought you up here today?
Daruk asked after a few more moments of silence. Death Mountain calmed now, silent once again.
Well, I came to tell you that I was going to be leaving Goron City for a while. Oh yeah. Well, you know how Link came by a few weeks ago and asked the boss if he could send some Gorons to help build up some defenses around that Hylian town? Yep. Well, we were waiting for the wild Dodongo thing to get under control before sending anyone. But now that they've been all rounded up, the boss is getting around to sending some Gorons. I told him that I would go, too.
Daruk raised his eyebrows, looking impressed.
But aren't there a lot of monsters there? Well, yeah,
Yunabo said, his pitch rising slightly.
But I don't think we're going to be fighting them. Besides, I figure, if Link thought it was important enough to come here and ask for help, then I should help. You know.
Daruk laughed and brought his hand forward to slap Yunabo on the back, though the hand ended up just passing through Yunabo's back and out his chest, leaving a line of cold in its wake.
Oops, sorry,
Daruk said, looking embarrassed.
But that's great, big guy.
Yunabo grinned shyly at the praise.
I just thought about what you would do. I knew you wouldn't let him down, and that I shouldn't either.
Daruk's expression grew warm, and he placed his hand on Yunabo's shoulder. It felt almost solid this time.
You're doing great, son. I'm proud of you.
Yunabo's heart swelled as he met Daruk's eyes. 3. The damn idiot, Tiba thought as he flew above Hyrule Castle, his keen eyes searching the land around it. It had been 5 days since the Sheikah man showed up to inform them that Link had gone missing. 2 days since the man showed up again to tell them that his Sheikah slate had been found near the castle. 7 days in total since Link disappeared. Why did he go to the castle like that? Without any backup, too. But Tiba knew. Deep down, Tiba knew exactly why Link went to the castle, even without cast lofty speculations. He did it for the same reason that Tiba was ready to fly back into battle with Meadow, regardless of the likelihood of his success. Link wanted to protect his family. Since finding out about Link's absence, both Tiba and Cass searched for Link, often taking turns flying out to the castle and surrounding areas and searching for any sign of him. Tiba recruited a few other Rito to stretch their patrols out further to the north and south. So far, even after several days of searching, they hadn't even found as much as a footprint. The Guardians were searching too. Far below him, one of the 6-legged beasts tromped through a grove of trees, knocking over several of them as it looked for its prey. That's good, Tiba thought. If they're searching too, then it means that they haven't found him. He might still be alive. That hope, however, was tenuous at best. There were only so many places that Link could have escaped from, assuming he fell into the river. True, he might have been swept further downriver, but both Rito and Zora searched in that direction as well without any success. It was like the man just disappeared into thin air. Or, more likely, he's just lying dead somewhere. Maybe he floated down the river. It was an uncomfortable thought. Cass reprimanded him when he first brought it up, but Tiba could tell that Cass was worried, too. With things at the castle getting seemingly worse, the Sheikah slate found at the bottom of the river, and Link still missing, despite nearly constant searching, the possibility that he had been killed was all too real. Cass still insisted that they hope for the best, however. He insisted that Link had faced worse in the past, and that he would likely turn up soon, having accomplished something else spectacular. And Tiba supposed that he agreed with Cass to a degree. Link was far more capable than Tiba initially gave him credit for. Below, Tiba saw one of the guardians firing at someone that had wandered too close to the search area. He focused, straining his eyes to see who the person was. It wasn't Link, however, but another man. The man seemed capable enough, avoiding the guardian fire while firing back with arrows that didn't seem to do much damage. Tiba watched for a time, admiring the man's tenacity, but it was clear that he was outmatched and unprepared to face the guardian. Sighing, Tiba angled himself into a dive and folded his wings against his body. He still had some explosive, tipped arrows, might as well put them to good use. "4. Makila Riju stood atop a tall sand dune, looking out across the desert with a spyglass, observing the distant sandstorm. Lightning flashed within the swirling wall of dust and debris, briefly silhouetting the great four-legged beast within. It was far enough away that she didn't feel the effects of the sandstorm, but that could change at any time. The divine beast had been raging for weeks now. While it had always been out there, secluded somewhere deep in the desert, it never bothered the Gerudo people. In truth, its presence was little more than the stuff of legend-wandering tribes would occasionally claim to have seen the great mechanical beast, but never could figure out how to get back to it. Anyone who got too close claimed that they were rebuffed by a sandstorm. Riju always thought that the tales were just that, tales spread about by the nomadic desert tribes. They had plenty of them, after all. Stories of great skeletons shading a beautiful oasis, of an enormous stone maze with no way to its center, and of an eighth heroine statue somewhere to the north. Perhaps some of them were true, but she had her doubts, just as she had doubted that the divine beast Vonaboris still inhabited her desert somewhere. Now, however, she found proof for at least one of their stories. Naboris had awakened and began ravaging the land almost immediately. A dozen of the small tribes had encountered her, forced to flee before her sandstorms and lightning. How many more had been unable to get away at all? It bothered Riju. She was not the desert nomad's chieftain. No, they chose to live apart from the Gerudo, adopting their own laws and practices. Some of them even accepted Vo into their ranks, treating them with the same respect as their Vae, ridiculous notion. But though she was not their chief, she was still the chieftain of the Gerudo people and, by extension, the desert. This was her land. And her land had, in its heart, a cancer that would destroy everything if something didn't change. So, completely defying what Buliero would have wanted her to do, Riju decided that she would at least try to understand it. She walked over to the small sled nearby and picked up Patricia's reins, smiling down at her beautiful sand seal.
"Let's see how bad this storm really is. Come on, Patricia."
The sand seal broke into motion, pulling her down the sand dune with haste. Riju grinned and reached up, replacing her veil over her mouth as they sped towards the storm. She wouldn't get too close today, she just wanted to see how bad it truly was. Their city had weathered countless storms before, and few of them caused any lasting damage. Perhaps this would be the same, if it came too close. As they flew across the sands, Riju glanced back in the direction of Gerudo town, but it had long since disappeared from view, hidden by countless sand dunes. Buliera probably realized that she had snuck out by now. She might have even figured out where Riju was going. She was always far too good at figuring out what Riju was up to. No matter, though. Even if she sped towards Riju now, she could never hope to catch up. Patricia could outpace any other sand seal in the desert with ease. She turned back forward, watching as the sandstorm grew in size. The wind had picked up, too. So far out from the sand wall? It didn't bode well for the nomads, at the very least. She continued through the dark desert, cold in the pre-dawn light. Her skirts flared out behind her, exposing her dark-skinned legs to the morning's chill. As she approached, the wind's strength continued to grow, whipping up sand that stung her arms and face. Finally, she pulled Patricia to a halt, staring up at the sand wall with a grimace beneath her veil. Wind pulled at her braid and fluttered her skirts. Even Patricia seemed anxious, shifting her weight back and forth and looking around. Lightning forked down from within the sandstorm, again briefly illuminating the incredible four-legged beast at its heart.
"This isn't good, Patricia,"
she said, stepping off the sled and walking up to stand beside her sand seal. She ran her fingers along the seal's dorsal fin. From her estimation, the nomads were right. The storm appeared terribly destructive, more so than any normal sandstorm in recent memory. The wind would be strong enough to rip up canvas tents and other structures not made permanent materials. The lightning would be worse, though. It flashed frequently, originating from somewhere around the divine beast and arcing down to the ground. The nomads carried stories of that lightning-shattering stone. Naboris wasn't turned in the direction of Gerudo town, which was a relief, but she feared that it could make that turn at any time. If it came to her home, with its terrible winds and lightning, then her people would be powerless to defend themselves. Without the Thunder Helm. Biting her lip in anxiety, a nervous habit of hers that Bulira scolded her for every time that she saw it, Riju looked back towards Gerudo town. It would be safe for now, but something had to be done. Naboris wandering would undoubtedly one day bring it towards the city. They needed to get the Thunder Helm back, find a way to get aboard the divine beast, and shut it down. Riju sighed, flinching as a gust of wind sent grit into her face. She turned and went back to her sled, picking up Patricia's reins.
"Come on, Patricia. We had better get home."
She turned her sand seal and began back in the direction of Gerudo town. She would need to meet with Captain Teak again and see if any progress had been made in the search for the thieves. Maybe the thieves left the desert, or perhaps they traveled west to the Barrens. Maybe they were. Something moved in the sands to her left. Riju gasped as a camouflaged Lizalfo suddenly burst from the sand, leaping into the air and flailing its rudimentary sword at the sand seal. Patricia barked in terror, swerving away from the Lizalfo and yanking her reins free of Riju's hands. She only remained on the sled because of the cord that attached her to the sled at her waist, but she lost all control of her sand seal. Another Lizalfo leaped out from behind cover, but they were moving too quickly now. Directly towards the sandstorm. Riju desperately tried to grab the reins, yelling for Patricia to slow down, but her voice was lost to the gusting wind and Patricia's own terrified barks. The wind grew even stronger, and the morning light dimmed as sand filled the air. The reins flapped through the air, just inches from her fingers. Riju stretched her arms, gritting her teeth as the sand blinded her. Her fingers touched the leather cord once, twice, but each time the cord whipped away before she could grasp it. "Please, Patricia, stop." With a supreme effort, she leaned forward, her feet unsteady as the cord at her waist pulled both her and her sled forward. The reins brushed her fingertips, and she caught it between her index and middle finger. She grabbed the cord with her other hand. She pulled hard on the rein, and Patricia began to slow. "That's it. That's..." She didn't even see the rock as it flew through the air. It struck her in the side of the head. Stars burst into Riju's vision before everything went dark around her. V.
"I'm afraid that we need to accept the fact that he might be gone,"
Impa said, looking around the table. Pura was there, looking uncharacteristically solemn, as was Robbie. They were joined by Jaren and Simon. Impa left Paya in Kakariko village. The girl had been nearly inconsolable since Link disappeared. The poor child, she had never known loss such as this. Her parents both died so young to the Telta plague. Perhaps Impa should have done more to prepare Paya for the pain of loss, but her hope, despite the state of the world, brought such joy to Impa's life. How could she snuff that out?
"We don't know that,"
Pura said, growing angry.
"If he was separated from his Sheikah slate, then he wouldn't be able to teleport back quickly. That doesn't mean he's dead."
Pura was another one that seemed capable of holding on to hope, despite evidence to the contrary. Perhaps it was because of her child body and the level of maturity that it seemed to have brought with it, or maybe it was because Pura had always been an optimist. She never had been willing to accept their fate.
"No, it doesn't, but we must face the facts,"
Robbie said, laying a hand on Pura's shoulder.
"We know he went to the castle Litz where his Sheikah slate was found. And we know that Calamity Ganon is growing in strength. Perhaps the boy made it out, but if so, why hasn't he been found on the road or near the river?"
Robbie had been more of an optimist once, too, though age and experience had driven some of that from him. He understood regret, perhaps better than either of the other Sheikah elders. Pura shook her head.
I don't know, but I'm not going to give up on him yet. We waited for 100 years for him to return last time. Why are we giving up on him now only after a couple weeks? Because we may not have another 100 years to wait for him, Pura,
Impa said.
Ganon's strength is growing. The signs are as clear now as they were 100 years ago. His armies are uniting as well, or have you forgotten about the monsters laying siege to your town?
Pura wilted, looking down silently. Impa sighed. She had always been the realist between the two of them. Pura always looked to a hopeful future, while Impa buried herself in the often despondent past.
So, what do you suggest, Impa?
Robbie asked.
Link defeated 3 of the divine beasts. Do you think that will be enough? Even 1 is more than we had when Ganon first rose. Perhaps 3 will be enough to weaken him. Make him vulnerable. But who will defeat him? Without Link, we have no champion.
Impa snorted.
I have witnessed many heroes in my life other than that boy. Perhaps none of them will wield the Master Sword, but I would hazard a guess that there are many in this world that would be willing to fight to save this land. And how are we going to find this hero?
Pura asked, her voice bitter.
If we have so little time, how are we supposed to search the land for someone willing to face Ganon? We've found this hero, Pura,
Impa said.
We've found many. Or, I should say, Link did. All along his journey, he has found and worked alongside heroes and leaders of the different Hyrulean races. He managed to unite the Zora, Gorons, and Rito in their desire to see their lands return to peace. I believe that we can take that further finish what Link started. You mean to raise an army?
Robbie looked thoughtful, tapping his chin.
Yes, I see the logic behind that. An army consisting of Zora, Goron, Rito, Hylian, and Sheikah warriors. Backed by the divine beasts. We would need weapons,
Impa said, meeting Robbie's eyes.
And armor. I have some already stockpiled. I have been salvaging as much material from the Guardians I have access to, but I'm going to need more. I will set my people to salvaging from the Guardians in the Blatchery Plains. There are hundreds there. Yes, that would be excellent. But if we have as little time as you fear, Impa, you must know that I won't have enough time to make weapons and armor for an army. No, but you could make enough to arm the primary fighting force. The ones that will clash with the Guardians at the beginning. It'll give them a chance. Exactly.
Pura watched their exchange, her expression still morose as it had been. Finally, she spoke up.
And what am I supposed to do? I can't make a bunch of new Sheikah slates for everybody. No, but you have 2 in your possession now. With their ability to teleport groups, they will be invaluable in transporting equipment for Robbie. There is something else that she might be able to help me with,
Robbie said. Both Pura and Impa looked at him, and Robbie leaned low, speaking conspiratorially.
The Sheikah slates are the means by which we can interact with ancient Sheikah technology. Yes, we know that,
Pura said, and then added,
obviously. I've been theorizing a way to take back control of the Guardians. As you well know, our control on them was tenuous, even before the calamity struck. We never did fully know how to control all of them at once. It always felt as if we were missing an important piece to the puzzle. Something that hadn't been discovered yet. Snap, get to the point.
Robbie scowled at Pura briefly but continued.
Impa, you still have the mural depicting the battle against Calamity ages ago, don't you?
Impa frowned.
Yes, of course. Why do you ask? There was always something on that mural that stumped us. Something that we didn't have 100 years ago. Can you think of what it is?
Impa thought for a time. She could picture the mural in her mind with perfect clarity. She had studied it for well over 100 years, after all. She could see the 2 heroes in the center, on either side of the calamity. She saw the Guardians surrounding them all. She saw the 4 divine beasts. And she saw. She looked up, her eyes widening.
The towers. The towers. Why were those on the mural? What purpose did they serve? Thus far, they appear to be doing nothing, but they must be important. When Link activated one, others rose throughout the land. One even appeared in the middle of the citadel. It must have been buried in the mountain all along. Perhaps the mountain itself formed around it in the last 10,000 years. Click, snap.
Pura slapped her hands on the table.
You think they're control devices? It's merely a theory that I have been. The Sheikah slate mentions them in its code. I didn't think anything of it when I saw it. I was working on Link's runes at the time, but...
Pura hopped off her stool, landing on the floor of her laboratory. She began to pace, snapping her fingers as she did so.
If the towers can control the guardians, then they must act like antennae. Perhaps there are so many of them because they have a limited range, or the more of them are activated, the stronger their signal. Hopefully, we don't need to activate each of them. That would take more time than I fear we have.
Impa said.
And several of them are in precarious positions, from my understanding. Yeah, the one near Hateno is surrounded by an army of monsters. And the one in Akala still swarms with guardians,
Robbie said.
But that is all beside the point right now. Pura, I need you to research this. Study the towers, if you can, and try to learn how to use them. Perhaps we can wrest control of the guardians back away from Ganon. Right.
She looked down at herself, thoughtfully.
Snap, I think I need to grow up some if I'm going back out into the field. Oh, thank heavens,
Simon said from his place nearby.
I don't have to put up with you, you know.
Pura snapped. Impa found that she was smiling. Yes, this was good. Perhaps, even now, some hope remained. Please be alive, Link, she thought. Prove me wrong once again.
Tonight, I spent the evening in the company of Link. With my grandmother, of course. Already, he has freed 3 of the divine beasts. It is so incredible to think that so much has changed in a mere 2 months. And he seemed so much happier tonight than he's been before. He smiled and laughed and asked questions of grandmother about his past. He asked a lot of questions about Princess Zelda and their journey together. Grandmother said that they used to laugh together a lot together, and that it always gave her hope that they were able to smile, despite the dire circumstances that brought them together. I wonder if Link is in love with Princess Zelda. If so, I think they suit each other quite splendidly. If they became a couple, I'd give that pairing my full support. Though just the thought of that makes my heart hurt. Is this what it means to love? If so, it hurts far greater than I ever knew it would. Yet seeing him smile tonight made me feel so happy, even if the smiles weren't for me.
A tear dropped onto the page, smudging the ink, and Paya reached down with a trembling finger, trying to wipe the moisture away. It was no good, though she just made it worse. Reaching up to her eyes, she wiped them quickly, yet it did little to stop the tears. It hurts, she thought. It hurts so much. She had written the entry the night of the Yiga attack. It was why she was still awake when they appeared. She hadn't been able to sleep after writing it, the implications of her own admission swirling through her mind. How little she had known. The pain she felt then was nothing compared to the pain of not knowing where he had gone. If he even still lived. It was the last entry in her diary. Though she had tried to write again since that awful night, she just couldn't get the words out any longer. No matter how many times she tried, she couldn't write. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, he had been gone. And a week ago, his Sheikah slate had been returned, found at the bottom of a river outside of Hyrule Castle. Paya drew her legs up to her chest and pressed her forehead to her knees, body shaking as the sobs overtook her once again. Her grandmother was still gone but would return soon, she knew. For now, however, she was alone, and she mourned. She wanted desperately to believe he was alive. That night, though she had been so terrified, for herself, for her grandmother, and even for their people, being with him had filled her with such strength. He never wavered. Though he was surely walking into a trap, he stood tall and fought with such ferocity to save the ones he cared for. She didn't know if she would have been able to fight back the way she had if it hadn't been for his strength. Grandmother always spoke about how he gave her hope, but Paya felt it was far more than that. Link inspired her to be better. He fought, no matter what. Even when everything collapsed around him, he never gave up. Never lost sight of his ultimate goal. He was a true hero. That was why she fought that night, even though she had been terrified. Even though she had never drawn blood before falling down the steps with the Yiga assassin and catching him by surprise. But now, what hope did she have? Link was, very likely, gone. For good, this time. Dead or dying. It no longer mattered if he loved her or Princess Zelda. It no longer mattered if he was handsome and courageous and kind. It no longer mattered if he smiled for her. But it did matter then his sacrifice not be made in vain. Paya slowly lifted her head, still sniffling, still trembling. She looked down at the page, blurry with her tears. She lowered her legs and moved her chair closer to her desk, wiping her eyes with the heels of her hands. She reached a hand out and pulled her ink pot closer before taking a quill and dipping it in the ink. Then she turned the page to the next blank one and began, finally, to write.
I pray that Link somehow survived. I hope that, one day, he's just going to appear in our doorway again, just like he has before. I want to see him smile again. But if he doesn't, I have to go on. There is more that must be done. I don't yet know what my part will be in all of this, but I have to be ready to do all I can to ensure that his dreams become a reality. Tomorrow, I will ask Dorian to train me further in combat. He is a former Yiga, which I know still makes grandmother uncomfortable, but he is our most skilled warrior and likely knows many techniques not even known to the Sheikah. If we are to continue to fight Calamity Ganon, then I wish to contribute in any way that I can, even if it means taking up the sword, as Link did.
End of chapter.